that our main way of relating ourselves to others is like things relate themselves to things on the market. We want to exchange our own personality, or as one says sometimes, our personality package, for something. Now, this is not so true for the manual worker. The manual worker does not have to sell his personality. He doesn't have to sell his smile. But what you might call the symbol pushers, that is to say all the people who deal with figures, with paper, with men, who manipulate, to use a better or nicer word, manipulate men and signs and words. All those today have not only to sell their service, but in the bargain they have to sell their personality more or less. There are exceptions.
So his sense of his own value must therefore depend upon what the market, in a sense, is willing to pay for him.
Exactly. Just as a handbag which cannot be sold because there is not enough demand is economically speaking useless. And if the handbag could think, it would have a terrific inferiority feeling, because not having been bought, it would feel useless. So does a man who considers himself as a thing, and if he's not successful to sell himself, he feels he is a failure.
All right, let's move to our social relationships, in our feelings toward our neighbors, toward our friends. What's happening to man in those spheres?
Well, in the first place, I would say our social relationships are relatively shallow. We are actually afraid to be intimate with people. Many people even with their wives and husbands. And we substitute, or we rather hide this fear of real intimacy by a superficial kind of friendliness, which is quite nice, but nevertheless very shallow. But I think there is another answer to your question, which I should like to give. Actually, if you take the average American, and studies have shown that, he is really concerned only with private affairs, that is to say, with his health, his money, and family affairs. He is not concerned with his society. He talks about it. But, you know, if one speaks of being concerned, I mean something about which one loses one's sleep sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the average American never loses his sleep about affairs which relate to his society and to our whole country. That is to say, I mean, he has separated his private life from his existence as a member of his society and leaves that to the specialists in the government to take care of.
Do you think that that is happening to American man? And of course we're speaking not only of American man, but American woman as well here, Dr. Fromm, in relationship to his politics, to his political beliefs?
Yes, indeed. We have in the same way relegated our own responsibility in what happens to our country to the specialists who are supposed to take care of it, and the individual citizen does not feel that he can judge and even that he should judge and take any responsibility. Here you point out to one really of the basic defects of our system, that the individual citizen has very little possibility of having any influence, of making his opinion felt in the decision-making. And I think that in itself leads to a good deal of political lethargy and stupidity. It is true that one has to think first and then to act. But it's also true that if one has no possibility of acting, one thinking kind of becomes empty and stupid.
Tell me, how did we get this way? What happened to us? Where did we get off the track, Dr. Fromm?
I think we got off the track, as many societies do, who follow successfully one aim and yet are not capable of seeing at what point the pursuit of this aim prevents them from following a more total aim. That is to say, they get into a blind alley. I think, to be specific, we got off the track when we concentrated more and more on production of things. Thereby, we created a split between intellect and emotion. Because in order to produce a modern technique, you have to use intellect. And we have created men who are very brilliant, who are very clever, but our emotional life has become impoverished.
Well, I would say at first, what I have I can lose. In other words, if my sense of identity is based on what I have on my possessions. If I can say I am what I have, then the question arises, what am I if I lose what I have? Therefore, the sense of identity based on what I have is always threatened. A person is anxiously concerned of not to lose what he has, because he doesn't lose just what he has, he loses his sense of self. If I feel I am what I have and I have nothing anymore, then I am not. And that sense of identity, which is based on to be, is entirely different, because that can never be taken away from me except if I'm insane or in some peculiar circumstances. I feel, I see, I love, I am sad. All these human experiences, which can be expressed in verbs, are human activities which are not dependent, which cannot be lost or destroyed. And therefore, the person whose sense of identity is based on what he is, that is to say, on the expression of his inner faculties, potentialities in the world, or in that sense in what he does, but does not in an outward sense, he does not have the anxiety to lose himself because something may be taken away from him. He is really free from that danger.
But it's also clear to me that you feel the bias, the general bias of people is towards the having mode in these days.
Undoubtedly. We live in a society in which is based, everything is based on, in the first place, private property. Private property is, in a way, sacred, and the threat against private property arouses feelings which go far beyond the existing danger that somebody may be deprived of what he has. It is really an attack against his religion, and he develops the kind of same fanatical feeling as if somebody attacks his God or his dogma, his religious dogma. And even those who have no private property to speak of, even for those, the concept of private property is sacred. There was an interesting thing after the First World War. There was in Germany a referendum where the former kings and princes should have their property confiscated for the use of the people, because after all they were responsible for the loss of the war. They had started it. Great majority no, because the concept of private property was so sacred that people rather were going hungry than to touch the private property of the German emperor.